All right. I actually do want to take just like a momentary break so I can let the stupid dog out, and then we'll come back. So just take uno momento, please. Come on,
Sure.
dog.
I like what you said
Jason
about.
doesn't like it when I talk about the books or like historical reality in movies. There's a handful of of individual subject, and he's got his headphones on. He can hear me. I'm not like whispering around him right now. But there's a handful of like specific things that I just because they're not the way that he watches or interprets movies, and he always gives me a chance to have my to have my piece on historical reality or how it doesn't match the books or whatever like that. But it's never his favorite part because Jason's like movies are their own thing, right?
Hmm.
Like that, fuck the fucking books, right? Like fuck
Yeah.
what really happened. Like we're here to talk about the movie, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I would say I definitely fall more into that camp, and I mean I've definitely championed movies that people who are more book leaning tend to not like, with like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban or The Shining and things like that. Yeah, like I'm like yeah, I don't care about the books. Those movies are awesome.
this is something that has happened as we've sort of been doing these shows, and also just in sort of years, more recent years, is the idea too that like everybody that I was ever talking to about this movie were Dune fans. And
Hmm.
either they didn't give a shit about David Lynch, or they didn't know anything about him, or they weren't paying attention to any of his other or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And the last probably 10 years or so that I've been having any of these conversations with anybody, I'm talking to David Lynch fans who don't give a shit about these books. They may or may not have read them, but they are talking to me about this movie from a David Lynch movie, and that has warmed me to the movie quite a bit, I have to
Oh,
say.
good.
Like getting away from talking to Dune fans about it, because they, and even when they like it, they're very annoying. Like but like my mother-in-law has never finished the first Villeneuve one, because she fell asleep and she hates it, and she loves the
Mhm.
David Lynch version. And I
Hey.
mean, my mother-in-law's a like super aggro Zionist also. I mean, there's all
Mm.
kinds of things that like we have very light conversations about, and we don't and we don't sort of get too deep into it, because I
Mhm.
think I can have those conversations, but I'm not entirely sure that she can. And
There
one
we
of
go.
them
Yeah.
is David Lynch's Dune, but she loves Dune. She doesn't give a shit about David Lynch. And when I tried to ask her about any of his other movies, she was just like, I don't know. Also hasn't read any of Frank Herbert's other books, but fucking definitely has a big time opinion on Dune. Anyway.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely enjoyed the second Villeneuve movie more
Mm-hmm.
because David Lynch's movie is I would say three-quarters of it is covered in the first Villeneuve movie. So the
Right.
first
Right.
Villeneuve movie is just like, it feels like a fan film to me. It feels like, it's like you're just playing the hits, buddy. Like, get out of here. And then the second one was all the material that like Lynch had to just, fast forward through, like
Right.
last week on Dune, and it's like and and I was able to enjoy, seeing that and seeing the real themes, shine through. So yeah, like so
Yeah.
I think but at the end of the day, they're a study in contrasts. They're two completely different
Yep.
interpretations of the same material, and I would argue there is another interpretation, a totally different one, to be made from these two, which is the environmental take on
Right.
the
Mm.
story. And I realized that when I discovered recently Rudy Wurlitzer's screenplay for the Ridley Scott version that didn't
Right.
get made, and that version was so interested in the environmental aspect and how it affected everybody on the planet, and how they were trying to to terraform and really change the face of Arrakis. And I think yeah, it just made me it's going to be one of those things where I think every generation we're going to get a new version of this story because it's always going to be relevant.
Mm-hmm. All right. I am back, so let's pick it back up. One Heat Minute Productions presents Guide for the Film Fanatic, the podcast where we invite a guest to pick one movie from Danny Perry's seminal 1986 film reference book and talk to us about that movie. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hull.
Thank you. Our guest today is a film critic with bylines at MTV, Slash Film, IGN, and Wired, among others. He's also the author of the book A Masterpiece in Disarray, which is an in-depth look at the making of David Lynch's Dune. Please welcome Mr. Max Evry. Hey, Max.
How's everybody doing tonight?
I am the right audience for that joke.
Coming right out the gate with jokes.
There it is. There's the capsule. Yeah. I wanted to show you guys something too. I also brought a visual aid for the podcast.
Oh, nice.
Good. Because I'm in my dad's house, and this is my copy of Danny Perry's cult movies. That
excellent.
Opened up my third eye.
There you have
back
it.
When I was 11 years old. Yeah, I was flipping through it today, and I do have to admit, I think the 11-year-old me is upset that 44-year-old me has not yet seen Beyond the Green Door.
Wow. Yeah.
You should be.
It's readily available
it's a good
now.
Movie.
Like you can see it much easier now than you either could have in that year or as an 11-year-old. Yes.
But no, Danny's book was so, it's such a great gateway drug into the world of weird movies. Even though there's a few like on like Casablanca and Citizen Kane that are like, are those really like? But like, yeah, like and obviously, David's Eraserhead is in there, and just seeing those
there we have it.
photos as a kid, like that was really eye-opening in an era where a lot of these movies, weren't as available as they are now. So
exactly, yeah. All right. Well, we usually start by plugging the guest's book or movie if they have a book or a movie to plug. And then we end that opening segment by asking what movie you're here to discuss. We really can't do that here because we're going to talk about the movie that you wrote an entire book about. But just so we're clear, and we've done our due diligence, what movie are we discussing on the show today?
Well, we're talking about David Lynch's 1984 movie Dune, and it's funny because I talked to Jason when we were discussing doing this podcast. I was like, I really want to talk about The 10th Victim, but I wrote this book about Lynch's Dune, and book sales and all. I need the Bailey bump. So my publisher was like, the Bailey bump is real, and I'm gonna need you to talk about Dune one last time.
All right. Well, so let's do the direct plugs first, and then we'll discuss the movie in depth. So tell everyone about A Masterpiece in Disarray and the specific way that you tell the story of the making of this movie.
So A Masterpiece in Disarray is it's 560 pages long, but I don't want anybody to feel intimidated about that because basically it's almost like two books in one because I have massive oral history chapters where I talk to 36 people who worked on the movie, and including Rafael De Laurentiis and Kyle MacLachlan and Sean Young and a lot of really good people. And it wasn't just like a Fremen extra number 2. It was it was most of the major above and below the line people, and and then you also have these kind of narrative chapters prior to each oral history chapter, which give you a little more context. And also because I was writing this book, 40 years after the fact, a lot of the people were dead. Or, in the case of David, I think he said a lot more interesting things about the film when he was making it than he has in later years. He kind of developed a spiel But yeah, it's yeah, but it goes through the whole process of pre-production, production, post-production, and I think the most important section of the book is the legacy of the movie, because like the movie Dune, for a guy who's such a celebrated director, I mean, he made 9 movies. So, and this is his biggest budgeted movie. This is, believe it or not, his biggest box office hit. And and he spent 3 years on it, and I think put a lot of himself into it. And I don't like the way it's been sort of roundly dismissed, just because it was a more commercial film, and because he kind of dissed it in later years. It was even to the point where after he passed away recently, Martin Scorsese wrote this whole loving tribute to
Yep.
David. um,
Yep.
and he mentions every single movie except
Yeah. He
which is
does.
like,
Sure
okay,
does.
Marty, when you die, I'll mention every single movie except The Color of Money. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um.
Like, come on.
Well,
Like, I mean, it's,
right.
and hopefully the book will get, will, the big feedback I've gotten is, the people who read it say that, they came away with a renewed or new appreciation for the movie.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, it is a terrific book. I read it between when we booked you and our talk tonight, but it was already on my, my 2025 reading list, because I'm currently writing a book that is a deep dive into one film. So let's call this next section free writing advice. Talk to me about the logistics of writing a book about a single film, a book of this size, how you went about talking to people, how long it took to do all the interviews, what your archival dig was like all, tell me some sort of nuts and bolts, because I'm hoovering all that information up at this point.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, like, like Dune as a movie, as a research subject,
Mm-hmm.
it was like a Matryoshka doll. Like, there kept being more and more layers to the story, and to how personal it was for David. What a Sisyphusian challenge it was to
Sure.
bring it to the screen, especially in that era, pre CGI, and when everything was a little bit limited, in terms of how they would imagine um, on screen a book of this sort of scope, and which was something that even the studio executives said, like, yeah, like, it's gonna take a miracle to get this
Right.
all on the screen. And so, yeah, like, I think the biggest challenge in terms of the nuts and bolts of research um, was just getting people to talk on the record. And I think it was a slow build up, where, like, you get one person, and then because you got that person, you get another person, and you kind of have to I mean, my methodology is to kind of start sort of lower on the totem pole. I talk to the production assistant, I talk to the DGA trainee, and stuff like that, like people who would have some interesting perspective that you don't normally hear from, and they're
Right.
like, oh, you should talk to this person, oh, you should talk to this person, and slowly you work your way up. And then eventually I got David, and that was the game changer, because then it was like, all of a sudden, as my friend Jordan Hoffman said, oh, it's a real book now. um
Right.
so
Right.
yeah, it's yeah, it was interesting. And once I got David, it was like, oh, okay, now Kyle wants to do it, now Sean wants to do it. It's like it all kind of fell together. So I have to say I owe an incredible debt to David. And yeah, this is actually the first time I'm talking about the movie, sort of, after his passing. So yeah, I've definitely been thinking about him, and and the movie a lot lately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's such a lovely moment in the book and also such a surprise. Like I hadn't looked in the table of contents. He hadn't been in the previous oral history sections. And so I'm just thinking, as an author, oh, okay, well, he didn't get lynched. That's totally cool. It happens. He has a lot of archival quotes, and clearly it wasn't something that he wanted to talk about. So then when it comes at the very end of the book, it's like, oh, it's this lovely little reveal. And then the approach that he takes, the reason that he says he wanted to talk to you is so moving. And it's also just such a David Lynch interview. Like his voice is so distinctive. You can hear him in your head when you're reading that interview. It's really nice.
Yeah, I mean, and like my background was when I wrote this book was more in like sort of access journalism, content farms, like really doing just like the shittiest writing you can possibly imagine. And I mean, that was part of the motivation to write the book
Sure.
was, I didn't
Sure.
want, my epitaph to be 5 new character posters for Mordecai.
Right.
So yeah, like
That's so specific. It has to be real.
Yes.
and so yeah, like it really, I had to when I talked to David, which was obviously Wizard of Oz, man behind the curtain kind of moment for me. I had to throw away all my sort of fanboy shitty journalism training and just be like, my whole purpose here is not to get scoops. It's not to get him to cry or to revel in I didn't even want to talk about the more uncomfortable aspects of the movie because he's already said he doesn't like talking
Right.
about it. It's a sad time in his life. It's like I
Right.
wanted him to come away from the interview feeling just a little bit better about the movie, and I think hopefully I think that comes through when you
It
read
does.
that, and I hope it acts as sort of a catharsis for the reader too, because it
Yeah.
is a lot. It's a lot of Michigas in the movie
Yeah.
making of the movie.
Yes, it is. Okay, well, let's get some bits of business out of the way, and then we'll talk about the movie in a little bit more depth. Mike, how about a trailer?
A beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191. In this time, the most precious substance in the universe...
Everybody hates this opening with Virginia Madsen, where she's literally like the Herald, the Explainer.
We will talk about it. I love this opening.
The planet is Arrakis, also known as Dune.
You are about to enter a world.
It's like a almost 4-minute long trailer. Like they really wanted you to feel the epicness when they were initially selling this.
Oh yeah. And you got the inner world guy.
You
I
did.
think he
He's
says the
literally
word
saying
world
he
like
does.
20 times.
He does. He doesn't literally say in a world, but he's it's in a world adjacent, this voiceover. Yes.
The prophecy which will cleanse the universe and bring us out of darkness.
Where a young warrior is called.
Can you imagine going to the movies and watching a 4-minute trailer? I feel like they would never let you go that long without a truck commercial at this point.
And I mean, obviously, I was very young when this trailer came out. But my friend Michael Gingold saw this trailer in the theater, and he was telling me like it was kind of a big deal because it came out like 6 months
Sure.
before the movie, and it really like he felt like really impressed by the trailer, especially the moment
Yeah.
when Kenneth McMillan spits.
I mean, you see all the money on screen. I mean, through the movie you see all the money on screen, but you really see it in this trailer. Like they're showing you the money shots here,
Oh yeah. No, it's inspiring. It's like, and it really does feel like, what it was intending to be, which was Star Wars for adults. You
Right.
know,
Was Elephant Man so big this is a blank check movie? Or was this just like somebody finally had to fucking do Dune and he's the first person to push through till the end?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, like people. I mean, he was offered, Return of the Jedi. He was the first choice to direct Return of the Jedi. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, like
Yeah.
people
Wow.
were, and I think Eraserhead and Elephant Man are two such totally different movies that you can almost read anything you want into it. Like, oh, this guy can do Star Wars. Like one executive wanted him to do Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's like,
Yeah.
nobody quite knew who David Lynch
Wow.
was. Obviously in hindsight we know who he was, but like,
Yeah.
I do have to say though, my big
Wow.
caveat is I do think he was a good director. I think he was a good choice for the film, and I think life got in the way.
So Dune was, in fact, the first successful attempt to adapt Frank Herbert's groundbreaking science fiction novel for the screen, which tells a futuristic story of rival families and civilizations battling for control of the desert planet, which is the only source of a vital spice. There were several previous failed attempts to turn Dune into a film by such auteurs as Alejandro Jodorowsky, Ridley Scott, and Roger Corman. It was ultimately directed, as we've mentioned, by Mr. David Lynch, who wrote the screenplay adaptation as well. This was Lynch's third feature after the midnight movie breakthrough Eraserhead and the mainstream award-friendly hit The Elephant Man. The famously troubled production was financed and coordinated by the legendary Italian showman Dino De Laurentiis. His daughter, Raffaella, was the producer. Mike, what does Mr. Danny Perry say about Dune in Guide for the Film Fanatic?
I mean, published in 1986, so roughly in line with the initial reviews. Big, beautiful, and a bust. Working in Mexico for Dino De Laurentiis, director-screenwriter David Lynch managed to capture the exact images of those wondrous planets, palace chambers, and creatures we imagined while reading Frank Herbert's novel. Indeed, the first few minutes of the film, including the noble Atreides family's arrival to rule the desert planet, contain some of the most impressive visuals in sci-fi cinema history. That's a
Yep.
heavy line, right?
I would agree.
Yep.
Unfortunately, in order to establish the look of the film, Lynch takes so long to get his story going that for the next 90 plus minutes he must rush through Herbert's plot, hoping that readers will fill in the gaps and recognize the characters who whiz past and be familiar with their motives, loyalties, etc. Those who haven't read the best-selling novel will be totally dumbfounded. Herbert cultists will say repeatedly, "I can't believe he left that out!" The book has too many characters with similar powers, it seems that everyone can read minds. But on a superficial level, they are different archetypes with different cultural backgrounds. In the movie, you can't figure out who anyone is or what he is capable of doing. The film's one unexpected success is Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides, who is believable as the messiah of the desert gorillas.
Just not believable as a 15-year-old.
Yes.
The part is poorly conceived and as inconsistent as in the novel. But that's such a fascinating way to the part is poorly conceived and inconsistent as it is in the novel. That's such an interesting way to make that comment on the movie. Because that's not a very nice thing to say about, your lead character, right? But when you make that point, it sort of forces you to question if there's a reason for it or anyway. Sorry, that was a sidebar. The part is poorly conceived and as inconsistent as in the novel, but MacLachlan makes us root for him even though we don't know what he's up to. Likewise, Kenneth McMillan modeling the ugliest facial makeup around makes us despise him even though we don't know exactly what his villainous plans are. Badly wasted. Brad Dourif, Sean Young, Sting, Linda Hunt, Francesca Assis, Paul Smith, Max von Sydow, Jose Ferrer, Dean Stockwell, Freddie Jones, Richard Jordan. Is there even anybody else in the movie? That is the Danny Perry capsule.
That is the Danny Perry capsule. All right, so all of that set on the table for us. Max, give me first of all your personal history with the movie. Like, when did you first see it, and what were your sort of initial impressions of it?
Well, my initial impression, unfortunately, came from a VHS recording of the Alan Smithy cut, which was the
Oh,
television version that Universal made. I think I taped it off the Sci-Fi Channel, and it's like 3 hours long, and it's so sloppily put together. It's just an atrocity, and David took his name off of it. And as I mentioned in the book, it's extra tragic because David did actually want to recut it for television himself, but the Universal just didn't want to put a penny into it, and he told him to fuck off. And yeah, and so but that was my first exposure, and I was sort of reading Herbert's book concurrently, and yeah, and then it just became a movie that I would revisit every few years. I'd be like, oh, Dune, like what happened there? Like the way you kind of want to look at like photos of the Black Dahlia or something like that.
sure.
It's yeah,
Good
and
comparison.
Who wrote the whole book about Ishtar? We talked to
Carrie Corrigan. No, she about Elaine May, but yes.
right,
Yes.
but like we had a whole big long chat about Ishtar, and it was a fascinating. I mean, that sometimes we got to do some revisionist history. It's just a thing
Right.
that has to be done sometimes.
Yeah, but I mean, especially like, and again, like coming from the vantage point of someone who worked for a bunch of shitty websites, covering Marvel movies and DC movies and Star Wars movies, just that have just been like regurgitated and reheated, and you know, watching Dune in 2021 when I started writing the book, I was just like, they would never make a movie like this now. And I'm
Right.
including Denis Villeneuve's version, which
Right.
is, in my opinion, I think very well made. Clearly much truer to the themes of the book. A par excellence adaptation, but uh, compared to the Lynch one, just utterly gutless and without any sort of authorial stamp to it. And yeah, and I think yeah, like there's a lot of Lynch in every frame of this movie.
Right.
Just the way it's paced and the way it's designed and the sound and I mean, it really wants to, like Eraserhead, immerse you in this world and take you on sort of the spiritual journey of Paul Atreides. And that's sort of where it gets tricky because the Frank Herbert book Dune, the first book,
Mhm.
has sort of three parallel tracks. There's the environmental track, there's the political track, which is the whole point of that. Beware of charismatic leaders, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Don't worry about that. We don't need that.
No.
That's. But and then the third track is, Paul does go on a true, Carlos Castaneda style spiritual journey, and I think that was absolutely 100% David's eyes in on the project. And I think that was the difference between just being a gun for hire on Return of the Jedi and getting to actually explore themes that were intrinsic to who he was as a human being, because he had been on a journey like that. He'd had a child, he'd gotten into TM, he'd had this whole like years long epic odyssey of making Eraserhead, and then
Right.
sort of coming out the other side of that, miraculously a viable director.
Right.
and a viable leader, you could say.
Right.
So yeah, I think he connected to the material like gangbusters. And it's just I think unfortunately for him, um, a lot of what he put into it got tossed at the very haphazardly at the last minute by the powers that be. And yeah, and the thing about it is, the thing about Dune is, as I said before, it's a 9 film filmography, 9 films over a 50-year career. So you
Right.
have to consider every single one. But I mean, like, it does stand out. It's definitely his only big budget, franchise. you know,
Right.
uh, it's the only movie he did that had a toy line parallel to it. Um,
Unfortunately, like
yeah,
I want the little blue box from Mulholland Drive, I mean, I want an
yeah,
And
action
you'll
figure for the creepy lady next door in Inland Empire. Like, what the fuck?
yeah. The Lost Highway, do it yourself camcorder or whatever.
There
Yeah,
you go. There you
yeah.
go.
No, but yeah, I mean, like the thing is like, yeah, like it does stand out, but it is also of a piece with the filmography. I mean, I guess it's a little bit like I don't know, like if like Elia Kazan had directed a Herbie the Love Bug movie or something. like Herbie crosses the picket line. You
Right.
know,
Is this his only literary translation? Right?
well, no,
There's not like
I think Wild at Heart was an
Yes.
adaptation, I
was it?
believe. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
It was a novel.
I'm trying to yeah.
And
Um,
and
but
the
yeah,
various the
yeah,
various
and
written
there are other directors
versions.
too, like oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say the various written versions of the Elephant Man sort of overlap with each other, but that was certainly not an original material the way that something like Blue Velvet was. Um, let's deal with the various elephants in the room
Hmm.
and get out of the way because I know Mike is chomping at the bit here. What doesn't work about David Lynch's Dune? What's not to recommend about it?
Well, it's it, it's strange. I used to say that obviously it wasn't the movie that he wanted to make, in the sense that like he wanted to make a 3-hour movie, and this movie's
Hmm.
2 hours and 15 minutes, which was sort of
Right.
demanded by Dino and the studio. And I mean, having seen it with an audience a few times now, I think it plays really well at 2:15. But at the same time, having seen, sort of fan reconstructions like the Spice Diver edit, I do think it also plays extraordinarily well with a lot of the footage, added in where it's supposed to be without a lot of the extraneous bullshit that the Universal Television people tried to slap into it. The Spice Diver edit, for anybody who wants to see it, is fantastic. And he actually went in and added the blue eyes into the deleted scenes and just took a lot of care
Right.
into it. And yeah, so I think yeah, the length is a bit of an issue. There's the slight problem that David Lynch's Dune is a extremely faithful adaptation of the book, except for the main theme of the book, which is beware of charismatic leaders. Which I think if you read interviews with Lynch, he never would have been interested in that, because like he's not that political
Right.
in that direct a way,
Right.
and B, he's a guy who followed charismatic leaders. He was a big fan of the Maharishi and TM and all
Right.
that. Like he once
Right.
paid $1 million to go to a mansion and see the Maharishi on a TV. So, and he talked about that openly and proudly,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
and I think that that's something that you just have to go into the movie um, knowing about Lynch. It's like that is his thing. The same way Hitchcock was into blondes, and Christopher Nolan is into dead wives or whatever. It's like I
Right.
think you have to recognize that that is who Lynch is, and and so you get the ending that you get, where instead of being horrified at the
Right.
jihad that he's unleashed on the universe,
Right.
Paul just is, basically a messiah who can make it rain,
Right.
and everything's gonna be awesome, and thumbs up. So it's like, yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of reverse subversion of material. Like you have a movie like Starship Troopers that Paul Verhoeven did, which is taking a fascist book and turning it into an anti-fascist book. And
Right.
yeah, this is a little bit of a twist on that. And I
Right.
and it's interesting to also, for me, to be reckoning with that, in the era we're living through right now, and like I think the thing that makes it okay for me is the fact that I think it's very true to David. And I
Mhm.
think that's just not the movie he wanted to make.
Right.
Whereas, Denis Villeneuve, he did the Paul is bad version of the story. Paul is a Hitler, basically. And you still had people on opening weekend, at the very end of the movie chanting, Atreides, Atreides. And I think, uh, I don't think that you necessarily get that overt of a fascist
Right.
ideology from the Lynch version.
Right.
I think Lynch is, it's just a spiritual journey, and and I think yeah, and as long as you've never read Dune Messiah, it's all good.
Mike, you're chuckling, you're grinning. What, anything you'd like to add to what doesn't quite work about David Lynch's Dune?
No, it's fine. It's just it's. I mean, I love hearing. I love fresh blood in my head, you know what I mean? New perspectives. Because like to me, I read the books, just I get such a different message from the books than everything that you're describing. And so I mean, like that's certainly, that stuff is certainly there, but to me there's sort of a different core to it. A different sort of central like factor to it. It's more about sort of, it doesn't matter who sort of you are, society and sort of the people who become in charge of your mission or your message are going to sort of pervert it to their own means no matter what, so on
Hmm.
and so forth. So I sort of take a different so I'm enjoying all of these things. The movie to me is, as a like fan of David Lynch, that's the problem with the movie to me, is that it's like it sort of feels unnatural. Like I was surprised to find out it was his idea and that he did the adaptation, as opposed to sort of taking it on as a challenge, because it feels to me so different than the stuff that I identify with him. It's so different than Mulholland or Blue Velvet or whatever, which all of the movies after Dune feel of a piece. Like that's the
Right.
other thing, but they don't feel of a piece with Elephant Man or Eraserhead. Like I think the idea that like, people didn't know who he was, or studio execs didn't know what to make of him or what to do with him. Maybe he could do Fast Times, maybe he could do Star Wars, right? Like the idea, I think maybe he didn't know for sure, or at least didn't know how to express the thing that he would eventually sort of become, because after this the movies are all David fucking Lynch movies, bro. And like this one is sort of this weird clash of two things that I love that like don't necessarily sort of make sense in the same room together.
Hmm.
And so, like I try to have these, I've tried to sort of come to this conversation apart from the books and whatever the fuck I might think about that. But actually, when we get to Double Up, and this is something that has happened several times in the like 4 shows that we've recorded, Danny Perry's capsule actually like fucks me up and causes me to sort of rethink
Right.
everything that I've thought about. So like this is between you and him, I'm going to have to watch this movie for the 15th time again after this whole conversation, because like there is a sort of evolving, thought pattern about it. And I am trying to I have been because we've talked about this before on one of the other shows, and I've been really trying to break out of my but the book and a man and a book, like, because this is one movie that I'm subjected to be that guy about.
Sure.
Right. Well, I mean, the point that I think that Max makes at the end of the book, which really brilliantly, is this idea that going through this experience that Lynch went through, and whenever it is funny. He did, you said it earlier. He does kind of have like a canned response to whenever the movie would come up in an interview or something like that, where he would always say, "I didn't have final cut." Like that was always his sort of explanation for what went wrong. But the thing that you describe really brilliantly is the way that sort of I am trying to make a point. The way the point that Max makes is that, going through the experience of having a movie that he worked this hard on and poured this much of himself into that still wasn't fully his, was in some ways really empowering in terms of deciding that he wasn't ever going to do that again. And that everything that he did after this was going to be like torn from his soul and part of his heart.
Yeah, sure.
And
bring somebody else in to finish my fucking movie. I dare you. I don't even know what it's about. Who the fuck are you going to find to come in and finish my fucking movie? Fuck you. Like, I mean, there really is like an element of like, this shit is so original. I mean, this is a conversation that like I've had several times with people about rap music. Was like, black music had been stolen by white people and recreated so many times that eventually they invented a kind of music that you can't fucking steal. White people can't steal that shit. And the one guy that ever pulled it off spends half his time like reaching out and talking about the background of it and his connection and all these other things. The one successful white guy, like Lynch, decided to become so Lynch that you can't possibly get anybody else to fake his shit or fix his shit. Leave it alone. Just the bet. You've already invested all this money in it. Just let me finish it. Right? I mean,
that's
thank
well
God
said.
for that. Thank Dune for that.
Right. But I do think, it was more than just a stepping stone though. Like I do, it does deserve its own reckoning, as opposed to, as David Foster Wallace once wrote in an article about Lynch, like he just kind of tossed it off as like, oh, this was just his stepping stone so he could get to make, real movies like Blue Velvet. And I think Dune is a real movie, and I think it is just as personal and just as Lynchian, as anything else he's ever done. I would actually say it's more Lynchian than The Elephant Man. I think The Elephant Man is actually more of a sellout movie. The Elephant Man didn't have a cat taped to a rat as a antidote milking device. but you see the mold for lots of what came later. It's like Baron Harkonnen in this movie is a G-rated Frank Booth. He's just Frank Booth without the F-bombs, and
I don't know that he's a G-rated. I'd say he's a PG-13, I'd say.
Okay, yes. And everything about Baron Harkonnen in the movie is coded, and everything about Frank Booth is not coded. But they're the same person. It's just the way his brain thinks, he sort of sees the world in terms of good and evil. And, and you see that dichotomy, expressed, in Blue Velvet and in lots of, obviously Twin Peaks. And Twin Peaks also has that sort of labyrinthine mythology and world building that Dune had. And David was very excited to keep building on that and keep making sequels. Obviously, I discovered...
Wow, that's the best comparison.
Yeah.
And obviously not visually, but that's a really great fucking point.
Yeah. And I discovered his script that he wrote for Dune 2, which is crazy. As a friend of mine said, it's like Bride of Frankenstein to Dune's Frankenstein. It just takes things to a whole nother level. And it would have been amazing. And he was, so this was the movie that got him jazzed about really, world building on a massive level. And I think, yeah, and I mean, obviously, then you get to movies like Wild at Heart, which I describe as whoops all Harkonnens. But like yeah, like I think his movies started to get very very dark
Right.
as he went along, and
Right.
yeah. But I mean, there's I was trying to think, maybe you guys could help me. I was trying to think of other sort of important filmmakers who have like a weird anomaly in their filmography, and the only one I could think of was Francois Truffaut and Fahrenheit 451.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very good
Wow.
comparison. Also, trying to adapt a huge sci-fi book and sort of running up against the limits of that. But you're right that there are like the things that I like the most in the movie, as someone who's not a huge sci-fi person who has not read the books, are there are some really Lynchian things in that. Like that whole bit with the pain box, like that is Lynchian as fuck. Like that scene is disturbing. It could have been goofy, and it is a little goofy, but it's also mesmerizing. And then I'm sorry, we mentioned it when we were talking about the trailer. I love the opening, Virginia Madsen, the delivering the exposition direct to camera. I think when you have to download that much information and set the table, you may as well just do it in that direct of a way and get it out of the way. But then the fade out and the fade back, oh yes, I forgot to tell you, I love that. I love that moment of like of self-awareness, of acknowledging that that's what we're doing, and having a little fun about it. Now, I know in serious dour sci-fi movies we can't have any fun, yada yada, but like I love that fun is there.
I also think that opening monologue serves to sort of like acknowledge that these things are sourced from a book. Mm-hmm. To like acknowledge that there's like that there's already a sort of a language and a thing that this is coming from, without like showing me the fucking book. Like some lady reading it in a rocking chair in a corner somewhere. Like it's a subtle way of acknowledging it in a way that I think is like, if it carries through the whole movie, less interesting, right? But
there
like as a way to open, it's a really beautiful way to acknowledge.
And a lot of people have pointed out how similar it is to the Log Ladies addresses in Twin Peaks, and and it's just it's part of a chain, it's part of a thread, and and I think and also in the book, it's again like all the people who would complain about, oh, Lynch didn't even read the book and all this bullshit. It's like, no, like it's really true. Like the person who is technically telling the story of Dune in the books is Princess Irulan. Right. Like it's supposed to be like sort of taken from something she's written, and it's supposed to be almost a unreliable narrator thing, where she's like almost a propagandist for Paul.
That's great. That's great. All right. Before we move into the next section, I do want to do this. Max was kind enough to do the comparison of the Villeneuve and the Lynch. Mike, I'm curious to know where you land on these adaptation comparisons.
I might not want to indicate the depth of my feelings about this. No, this is what I was saying about the thing from the line, the thing from the from Danny's review, is he says in here, David Lynch managed to capture the exact images of those wondrous planets, palace chambers, and creatures we imagined while reading Frank Herbert's novel. And that to me is a sort of mind-blowing thing to read, and is something that frankly I had never considered before. Because from my perspective, this thing is so Lynch, is such a David Lynch vision, understanding of it, that it's hard for me to, he's just sort of sees the world differently than the rest of us do. You know what I mean? Like his sort of interpretation things are so sort of uniquely his that he has spawned, a Lynchian, a sort of adverb or whatever that right? He's sort of, and so like, so to me, the newer ones are just so like, 100, like 0 to 100 in terms of the way I see the books in my own head. And so to read that, which I read before the show, while I was sort of prepping and everything, like, and that's been the only thing that I've been able to think about since I read it, is the idea that he said this is exactly how we all envisioned it. Right? So like, it's not just him saying like, this is how I see it. It's him saying like, this is how me and everybody I know and everybody whose opinions that I read and all, he captured it. He did it. And to me, when I see it, all I see is David Lynch in his fucking sandbox, with his play toys, right? All this thing just looks so much like his version of the world that shocked me to hear that. So like for me, there's no comparison, but apparently that's a subjective thing. Apparently apparently my opinion is not objective, and my reading of this novel is not
correct.
The only way to read a novel or to understand the world or to envision things. I'm highly upset by this notion that's been put in my head now. So I genuinely prefer the second one, the newer ones in a huge, huge way. And I don't give a shit about the people who are in it. Like, I like his movies, but you know what I mean? It's the fealty to the way that I read the books, which is how I've never described it that way. Here's me evolving a little bit in front of your eyes. It's like, apparently me and him read the books the same way. And Lynch just saw a much more colorful version, just read a much more colorful version out of the same pages than I did.
Yeah, and so, it's interesting. I talked to a director in my book, James Cameron, and he said basically like he doesn't like the movie. He's like, I don't like Dune. I don't think it works. But I told Denis Villeneuve, you've got your work cut out for you in terms of the visuals, because the Lynch's Dune visually, just on a visual level, is indelible. I think if you sort of separate it from the things that don't work, and you just look at individual frames, not panned and scanned like I had to watch when I first saw the movie. If you can really enjoy it, and the Arrow Blu-ray, by the way, is beautiful. That's definitely the way to go. If you want to see, if you've never seen the movie, see the Arrow Blu-ray. But I think even James Cameron had to admit that there is a power to the imagery in this movie, and it taps into the same sort of arena that Lynch is known for in all of his movies, which is tapping into the subconscious. He is an heir apparent to the original surrealists, to Buñuel and people like that. I think, and all that is in there. From the the open hands to the just the look of the worms and the way they're shot. It's so phallic, and it's also a vagina dentata and all this stuff. It's like it's such a cool looking movie.
Yeah. All I will say, and then we'll move on, is I watched Dune Part 1, Villeneuve's Dune Part 1, and it literally put me to sleep. I've never seen Part 2. And one thing that I can't ever imagine is David Lynch's Dune putting me to sleep. Okay. Friends, let's talk about the release and reception of Dune, which opened in New York on December 14th, 1984. Also opening that day, and holy crap, it was a packed day, David Lean's A Passage to India, John Carpenter's Starman, Michael Radford's adaptation of Orwell's 1984, Michael Crichton's futuristic Tom Selleck cop thriller Runaway, the Jack Lemmon vehicle Mass Appeal, and another troubled production from a noteworthy director that's far better than its reputation, Francis Ford Coppola's The Cotton Club. Mike, what were the news headlines on that day?
Friday, December 14th, a radical conservative American president announced he was leaving UNESCO, the UN education arm, because they weren't pro-America enough. Awful business, all this living in a global society stuff. Anyway, good thing that'll never happen again.
Yeah,
New York City Archbishop John J. O'Connor announced that he would rather forego using city money at his Catholic charities than be forced to hire gay people per a new city law that banned discrimination. On brand.
Fuck that
Yeah,
guy.
and he made that announcement at for the first time at a press conference with Mayor Koch, who, you know, whatever his proclivities were, he was definitely signing laws that said you couldn't ban gay people anymore. And he was he didn't do jazz hands, but he was shocked.
Yeah.
I was just gonna go on a small tear about Reagan because, you know, this movie came out weeks after Reagan won
Re-election.
the second term with 68% of the vote, and he won 49 out of 50 states. Now, you want to talk about a plurality? That is a plurality. And I'm like, and even though, you know, Trump is in a different kind of position than Reagan was, and he's a different kind of person, I think, you know, it must have been not a great time to be, you know, on the left side of things at that point in time. And I will add, Ronald Reagan watched Dune at Camp David, and he had David Lynch and his wife at the time, Mary Fisk, over for a state dinner, and they talked. They talked about Dune. They talked about the effects and stuff. So I think that's wild because it's like, you know, whatever you say about Reagan, you know, and it's sort of like this with me with Teddy Roosevelt. Like if you go back and look at Teddy Roosevelt now, he's like Bernie Sanders, but and it's again like Reagan. You know, he was this figure of evil for me growing up, and now you look at it, it's like at least he had some fucking intellectual curiosity about the world. You know?
Yeah. Fine point.
And finally, on page A12 of the Daily New York Times, a story about the government of Ethiopia relocating more than 70,000 people as part of a program to help those who were hit by the famine that ravaged that country in the 1980s. I find this remarkable because for some reason, one of the main memories I have from the 1980s is Sam Kinnison's Go to Where the Food Is bit. And the earliest performance of that I can find is from a young comedian show hosted by Rodney Dangerfield in 1985. So obviously Sam Kinnison didn't read the New York Times because guess what? They were already doing that, Sam! And that's headlines. Jason, what did the critics have to say about Dune?
I appreciate the Kinnison infused reading of that last headline.
I can't get my voice as high as he did. I did some rehearsal. It didn't work. I just had to go with volume.
I feel caffeinated right now. This is great.
There we go. Well, Janet Maslin at the Times set the tone of the contemporaneous reviews by writing, quote, "Several of the characters in Dune are psychic, which puts them in the unique position of being able to understand what goes on in the movie. The plot of Dune is perilously overloaded, as is virtually everything else about it. As the first king-sized Italian-produced science fiction epic, Dune is an ornate affair, awash in the kind of marble mosaics, wood paneling, leather tufting, and gilt trim more suitable to moguls' offices than to far-flung planets in the year 10191. Not all of the overkill is narrative or decorative. Even the villain, a flying pustule-covered creature, has more facial sores than he absolutely needs." In the New Yorker,
that's a fucking weak. That's weak tea, bro. That's a shitty review.
Weak.
I'm sorry.
Weak.
You're whinging about the poster. That's some bullshit. Sorry, carry on.
In the New Yorker, Pauline Kael added, "Lynch doesn't bring a fresh conception to the material. He doesn't make the story his own. Rather, he tries to apply his talents to Herbert's conception. He doesn't conquer this Goliath, he submits to it, as if he thought there was something to be learned from it. He's being a good boy, a diligent director, and though Herbert's prose can prostrate a reader, it's dry with gusts of stale poetry, Lynch treats the book so respectfully that he comes out with a solemn, big-budget version of Up in Smoke." Which is a good line. It's a good, props to Pauline. Good line. But there were good reviews. This was not universally panned. I found a really compelling one by Felice Picano in the New York Native, who called it, quote, an extraordinary visual and narrative experience. It is perhaps the most beautiful motion picture in years, combining several unlikely visual styles into a completely integrated and satisfying vision that is both ultra-realistic and dreamlike. He concluded, Dune is exhilarating, exciting, and above all, strange. I predict that it will be around long after its competitors have become video store rejects. And in Newsweek, David Anson raved, it is a dark, spellbinding dream full of murmurs and whispers, Byzantine plots, and messianic fevers. It finds its iconography of the future deep in the past. It's not always easy to follow, but it's even harder to get out of your system. For better and for worse, it takes more artistic chances than any major American movie around.
Hell yeah.
How did it do in terms of box office and awards, Mike?
Guess what movie hit theaters 1 week before Dune? Well, it was Beverly Hills Cop, which ended up as the highest grossing movie of 1984, and people were very much still going to see Beverly Hills Cop on Dune's opening weekend. It did come in second for the week, which is basically like coming in first, which is quite respectable considering how crowded the mall multiplex was. The trouble with that $6 million opening weekend was the movie's $40 to $42 million budget. Dune ultimately topped out at $31 million domestic and was perceived as a commercial failure. In spite of the high quality of its technical craft, Dune only managed one Oscar nomination for Best Sound Mixing, which it lost to Amadeus. That movie won some hardware. Again, it's like, I mean, goddamn, bro. Like, what are you supposed to do? You came out 1 week after, you know what I mean? You're up against Amadeus, for fuck's sake, for a sound award. God, that's a rough road to hoe. That movie, it was also nominated for Best Sci-Fi Film in that year's Saturn Awards, where it lost to The Terminator. Again, goddamn, that's a rough. It did, however, win the Saturn for Best Costume, which I like to think was just for Sting's codpiece. Yeah, I think that's about right.
And for those people who don't think that James Cameron's a small, petty man, he did tell me that 40 years later, he still has a lot of schadenfreude for the fact that they were this tiny, little, low-budget science fiction movie and they kicked Dune's ass.
Of course. All right, gang. Now it's time for a segment we call Double It Up, where we each select one movie that we think would make an ideal double feature with today's focal film. Max, you're our guest, which means you go first.
So I'm gonna pull a. It's gonna sound like a pretentious choice at first, but just stay with me, please. I'm picking Jacques Tati's Playtime. I believe it's from 1967. As the accompanying film. I'm doing this for a lot of reasons. Number one, David Lynch was not what you would call a cineast necessarily, but there were, a handful of directors that he really loved and wanted to emulate. One was Hitchcock, and the other was Jacques Tati. And, Tati, the thing that separates him from some of the other sort of, slapsticky kind of movie comedians was he liked to blend, elements of surrealism and, incredible, intricate visuals, and Playtime is sort of that, the pinnacle of that for him, because he literally built a whole fucking city. And it took years to make. And if you watch Playtime, the whole thing with Playtime is it's shot in 235, and every shot is like a 3-ring circus. There's something happening here. There's something happening there. There's something happening in the middle, and when you watch Lynch's Dune, you get the same kind of vibe. It's like, one example I could give would be the scene at the beginning with the third stage guild navigator being brought in this huge tank. He's this giant worm. And he's really impressive. And then as they're leaving, there's this little guy off to the side, like vacuuming up like just a small amount of slime that they're leaving. It is one of those things where it feels like a Tati-esque moment. And I even went back and, I watched a few scenes from it again, and yeah, like even the sound design. There's a lot of droning and machinery. You really feel the oppressiveness of modernization, and there is a shot in Playtime where Mr. Hulot is overlooking this sort of cubicle farm, which are all these like sort of squares
Mm-hmm.
that have like no exits,
Right.
and they all like tinted green, and there's sort of a grid of like a dozen of them. And there's a shot in Dune where I believe it's an Albert Whitlock matte painting married with some live action and some models. And it's on the Harkonnen homeworld when Piter is going to see the Baron, and you overlook this sort of spice production facility. And it's the same thing. It's like this grid of these green squares, and
Nice.
it's the same shot.
Nice.
So there you go.
So my pick, I had a moment where I was like, maybe I should just pick the Cotton Club because they came out on the same day. And I just always want an excuse to recommend the Cotton Club, specifically the Cotton Club Encore, the recut that came out a few years ago, restored a bunch of the great Gregory Hines stuff in it. But ultimately I was like, I think that movie is a little, frankly, it's a little too smooth, it goes down a little too easily to pair quite right with Dune. But then as long as I was thinking about Coppola, I was like, you know what Coppola's Dune was is Megalopolis, that just came out last year. I think of them in a lot of the same terms and with a very similar affection. Megalopolis is lumpy. It's frequently silly. Long stretches of it don't work at all. Entire performances seem airlifted in from other movies, but it has moments of such incredible beauty and of intricate design. And above all, it's just taken it's taking swing after swing after swing, with the sort of, I don't give a fuck, I'm Francis Ford fucking Coppola, that I can only sort of sit back and admire and regard with awe. And so I think on those terms, in terms of an artist making a giant movie and just fucking going for it, Megalopolis pairs with Dune really nicely. Mike, what's your pick?
You remember when we were doing Godfather 2 and I was like, you should watch Godfather 1? I mean, I'm sort of dumb about these things sometimes, but like,
Sure.
watch the new Dunes if you haven't watched the old
Okay.
Dune. I mean, if you haven't seen them, and it doesn't matter how you feel about either one, watch the other one. So like, if we're talking
Sure.
about the 84 Dune and you haven't
Sure.
seen it, watch them both, because like, and I say this because I don't know what else to sort of relate them to. Because as we discussed before, like there's things that you can find, there's Lynchian things that you can find in it, but like you need to like do your fucking Lynch before you're looking for Lynch and Dune. Like you need to like, you know what I mean? Like you need to know a little bit. You need to get there's a little bit of assumed knowledge here you need to get caught up on before you go looking at that to really study him. Right. But like they are, and this is another thing. This is another reason why, because it's very rare that we sort of get two utterly different takes on the same source material, both of them with exceptional people, sort of leading the production, exceptional amounts of money, very fucking like top shelf actors. I mean, this is another one of those things where like a lot of times when we get a remake, it's either trying to be very close to the same, or it's Charlie and the Goddamn Chocolate Factory. And it's just, for whatever reason, man, you can't recreate that magic, and you can't make new you know what I mean? Like, it's just, I feel like there's just very, very few examples. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now of two, sort of takes on one property. I mean, there's like 17 Supermans or something, and they're all based on the same like 25 original comics. Maybe that works, but like, I don't know enough about any of those things to be able to make a relevant sort of comparison for them. But there are genuine, and also there is no shortage of other people talking about comparing these two movies also. So it's one of those things where like, if you have a writer that you really like, or a director that you like, or a movie thinker that you like, there's a good chance that they have some comment at some point about these sort of movies at this point, because the new ones have been such a big deal that they've been sort of unavoidable if you're interested in these things.
Yes.
So I just, it's a really dumb answer that sounds like I didn't think about it at all, but I really did think about it. And it really is, there's an opportunity here
I believe you
to
did.
study this thing in a way that very few other properties give you.
Yeah, I don't think it's dumb at all. In fact, I think, the thing that I was so happy about coming out of Dune Part 2 was I was like, like this project, this 2-film project does not negate
It's a completely
David's movie
different
at
thing.
all, because it's a totally different interpretation. It's a study in contrasts. Yeah. And I think I think people could be comparing these things and writing papers about them for decades, because it's like it is how do you take the same source and just it just completely transform it into one kind of narrative and another kind of narrative.
And so much of that
I
has
think
to
that
do
was great.
with David
There we
Lynch
have
and his
it.
understanding of the world and his perspective on things. And that's something that you are really bringing out in this conversation in a way that a lot of people don't. A lot of times when we're talking about these two things, what they like about one or the other is oftentimes a little more superficial than the way that you're approaching it, and approaching it as a Lynch fan and from that sort of perspective actually has brought more to this than I have.
There we have
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there will never be anyone like Lynch. No one before or since, has been able to operate, within pop commercial filmmaking, with the level of artistic integrity and personal integrity, that David Lynch has. He really was one of a kind.
Cheers to that. And a great fucking haircut too.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
The best
All right.
hair.
Max, where can people follow you on social media and read your work?
I am at Blue Sky. Crickets. I still have the other crummy socials, but I'm going to be ignoring them for a while. So just follow me on Blue Sky. And also I have a website, www.maxevry.com. And that has lots of fun stuff on it. You can find some past interviews, podcast appearances. You can learn some of the other stuff I do, including I do a lot of audio commentaries and Blu-ray special features for companies like Kino Lorber, Arrow, Imprint. I just did my first Vinegar Syndrome, which I'm very happy about.
Wait, you haven't seen Behind the Green Door and you're doing Vinegar Syndrome? No, the world. There's a hole in the ozone somewhere in that.
I've seen some weird shit. I've seen Mystics in Bali. I've seen Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story.
Okay, you're good. Never mind.
I've done my weird due diligence. Yes.
There we have it.
Yeah, but yeah. So and I have a lot of cool releases coming out this year. Stuff that I'm working on. I just finished John Frankenheimer's Prophecy. I did a commentary on that, which I'm
Nice.
I love that movie. So
Nice.
yeah. And then and buy my book. Get me that Bailey bump.
There we go.
It's available everywhere. It's Kindle. It's in second printing, and in physical form. And then there's going to be an audiobook shortly. I don't know when exactly, but it's almost done.
There we go. All right. Congratulations. I am Jason Bailey on Blue Sky and Letterboxd. Mike, where can people find you?
I am Fifth Column Films on Blue Sky.
And of course, if you like the show and think other people might like it too, please leave us a rating and or review on your podcatcher of choice. If you'd like to join our mailing list and get our weekly show notes and such, you can do that at buttondown.email/filmfanatic. If you'd like to make a donation to support the show, you can do that at ko-fi.com/funcitysounds. And if you're one of those freaks that likes to watch videos of people recording a damn podcast, find us on YouTube at our channel, Danny Perry Rocks.
I'm doing a little dance to make the visuals.
There you go.
Can't get that on the podcast.
That's right.
No. How exotic was my dance? Tune in to find out.
Our humblest thanks to our guiding light, Mr. Danny Perry, author of Guide for the Film Fanatic, And shout out to executive producer Blake Howard, who keeps turning up for Zoom meetings in the Sting cod piece.
Thank you again, Mr. Max Evry.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. This has been so much fun. I appreciate all the different podcasts that you guys have done. So this was a thrill for me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening. Join us next week when we welcome Alana Kaplan, author of Nora Ephron at the Movies, to discuss 16 Candles.